Expansion of the British Empire. George I IV, from 1714 to 1830, are often designated as the Georgian era, although some historians might also include the reign of William IV, that is, from 1714 to 1837. The expansion of the empire also brought fame to statesmen and explorers such as Clive of India and Captain Cook. Britain imposed mercantilism as the basic policy on all its colonies. Mercantilism meant that the government and the merchants became partners with the goal of increasing political power and private wealth to the exclusion of other empires. The government protected its merchants and kept others out by trade barriers, regulations, and subsidies to domestic industries in order to maximize exports from and minimize imports to the realm. The government had to fight smuggling, which became a favorite American technique in the 18th century to circumvent the restrictions on trading with the French, Spanish, or Dutch. The goal of mercantilism was to run trade surpluses so that gold and silver would pour into London. The government took its share through duties and taxes, with the remainder going to merchants in Britain. The government spent much of its revenue on a large and powerful Royal Navy, which not only protected the British colonies, but threatened the colonies of other empires and sometimes seized them. The colonies were captive markets for British industry, and the goal was to enrich the mother country. The British expansion would have gone unchecked but for the American Revolution, where the combined weight of the United States, France, Spain, and the Netherlands overwhelmed Britain, which stood alone without allies. The loss of the American colonies was regarded as a national disaster and as heralding the end of Britain as a great power. American Revolution. The American Revolution was a political upheaval that took place between 1765 and 1783, during which colonists in the 13 American colonies rejected the British monarchy and aristocracy, overthrew the authority of Great Britain, and founded the United States of America. Starting in 1765, tensions had been building between colonists and British authorities. Attempts by the British government to raise revenue by taxing the colonies through the Stamp Act of 1765, the Townshend Tariffs of 1767, and the Tea Act of 1773 met a heated protest among many colonists, who resented their lack of representation in Parliament and demanded the same rights as other British subjects. During the following decade, protests by colonists, known as patriots, continued to escalate, resulting in the Boston Tea Party in 1773, during which patriots destroyed a consignment of taxed tea from the Parliament controlled and favored East India Company. The outraged Parliament passed a series of measures such as the Intolerable or Coercive Acts to reassert imperial authority in Massachusetts. In response, a group of colonial delegates met in Philadelphia in September 1774 to give voice to their grievances against the British Crown. The First Continental Congress did not go so far as to demand independence from Britain, but it denounced taxation without representation, as well as the maintenance of the British Army in the colonies without their consent, and issued a declaration of the rights to every citizen, including life, liberty, property, assembly, and trial by jury. The Continental Congress voted to meet again in May 1775 to consider further action, but by that time violence had already broken out. On April 19, local militiamen clashed with British soldiers in Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts, making the first shots fired in the Revolutionary War. The Second Continental Congress convened in Philadelphia in May and voted to form a Continental Army with Washington as its commander-in-chief. On July 4th, the Continental Congress voted to adopt the Declaration of Independence. But such was not to be. Patriot forces, commanded by General Horatio Gates, achieved a significant victory at Saratoga, New York in October 1777. Within months, this victory induced France to sign treaties of alliance and commerce with the United States. In retrospect, French involvement was the turning point of the war, although that was not obvious at the time. Later, Spain and the Dutch became allies of the French, leaving the British Empire to fight a global war alone, without major allies, and requiring it to slip through a combined blockade of the Atlantic. In October 1781, under a combined siege by the French and Continental armies under Washington, the British surrendered at Yorktown, Virginia. The significant result of the revolution was of course the creation of a democratically elected representative government responsible to the will of the people. However, its impact on Britain was also enormous. Losing the war and the 13 colonies was a shock to Britain. The defeat heightened dissension inside the parliament. The primary concern changed from fears of overmighty monarch to the issues of representation, parliamentary reform, and government retrenchment. Reformers sought to destroy what they saw as widespread institutional corruption. Review: the British Empire was expected in the Georgian era, though continental warfare and mercantilism. The British won 7 years' wars, the French Revolutionary Wars, the Irish Rebellion of 1798, and the Napoleonic Wars, and lost in the American Revolutionary War. The goal maximized exports, and the means of mercantilism were trade barriers, regulations, and subsidies to domestic industries. American Revolution arose from growing tensions between the British government and colonists in 13 American colonies. Sources of tensions are excessive taxing, lack of representation in the parliament, and the maintenance of army in the colonies. It was triggered by the Boston Tea Party in 1773 and escalated protests of the colonists against the British authorities. It was officially started by the first shots in Lexington and Concord in April 1775. A critical movement was the signing of the Declaration of Independence in 1776. A turning point came when France entered the war on the side of the colonists in 1778. Under a combined siege by the French and the Continental armies, the British surrendered at Yorktown.